Hello, everyone, and welcome to Myth-Informed with your hosts, Brian Edwards and Dimitri K. We're thrilled today to be speaking with Peter Boghossian, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Portland University and accomplished author. Peter is widely renowned as a speaker for the Richard Dawkins Foundation, the Center for Inquiry, and the Secular Student Alliance. His primary areas of research include critical thinking, philosophy of education, and moral reasoning. Peter, it's an absolute pleasure having you here today.
The pleasure's mine. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate that.
Okay, Peter, I've listened to a lot of your stuff, and you've critiqued the religious right. You talk about a lot about applying the Socratic method, but I almost feel that the most important place we can apply the Socratic method today is to postmodernism. And I guess I don't even know how to define postmodernism. Here's was my guess. Objective truth no longer exists. Everything is subjective. Or I could go with Urban Dictionary's basically, fuck it, to the search for any intellectual conclusions. What do you think?
So postmodernism is a nebulous term. It's a vague term. It's inherently vague. The first definition you gave, I love the second definition. The first definition you gave, so part of postmodernism is the idea that everything is relative. Everybody has their own truth. I have my truth. You have your truth. So just as you have certain preferences, truth is reduced to preferences. So you have certain preferences for what you like on your pizza, what kind of beer you like to drink, or none at all, what kind of sexual partners you like to have. Truth has that quality of a preference in the postmodern universe.
Truth has a quality of preference.
Yeah, so it's not as if there are truths. Like, let me give you some examples. So it's not as if we can make statements about a particular culture, a particular way to be in the world. Like, Plato's question, is one type of life better to lead than another? For the postmodernists, there are just different types of lives. So there's no objective truth. There's just narrative. There's just stories that people have about their own lives.
But in our modern society, I mean, we have to have some pieces of factual information. You know, you come from the correctional world. That's really where you got started. I mean, you have a fascinating doctorate in working with prisoners. There's got to be some black and white there.
Well, yeah, because the whole notion that there's no truth is total bullshit. Right? I mean, it's manufactured by vicious ideologues who I don't think at any level actually believe that. Because if they look, and you can test it not by their verbal behavior, but by how they act. Isn't it funny that when these people get toothaches, they don't sacrifice a goat in the hood of their car? Right? So when they get a toothache, they go to the dentist. Well, they go to the dentist because they know that modern dentistry is the most effective way to deal with tooth pain. Same thing when they manage their money. Same thing when they make financial decisions in their lives. So they don't actually believe that.
Unless you're a Christian Scientist, in which case you don't go to the doctor.
But no, it's inconsistent. And the reason why I find myself arguing against, I guess we can call it postmodernism, liberalism, is because it's inconsistent, like the Bible. You know, don't murder anyone, but then murder somebody for carrying sticks on Sunday. It doesn't. Nothing computes, right? I mean, you have an inconsistent piece. But how do they believe it themselves? That I don't know. Jordan Peterson came up with that study. You've heard of this one, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Who came up with what study?
Jordan Peterson is a social science professor at Ottawa, and he was looking at like the overly PC people, and he defined two categories: authoritarians and egalitarians. And he said that the authoritarians were kind of low verbal cognitive ability, but high interpersonal disgust. That they don't like shaking hands with people. They don't like drinking out of the same glass as somebody else. And then the egalitarians, these are your the professors, those that can talk the talk, and they feel like they must defend the others, and that this protection, almost like the analogy was made, like the infant can never be wrong. We must rush to protect it.
No, I'm not familiar with that piece of work. Look, here's what it all comes down to. You either believe that your values are rationally derivable, or you do not. It's binary. So if pick any kind of hot button issue in society today. Trans issues, gay issues. Interesting, the first two that came to my mind were sexual, because I think we're in the middle of some weird, I don't know, Victorian, I don't even know what it is. But just pick any hot button issues. Immigration, Trump, Muslim immigration. You either believe that the position that you hold is derivable by an objective, independent inquirer, or you do not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you do, then what happens is those people, almost to a person, depend upon free speech, free expression. And they do that because they believe that they have the truth. But if you believe that your values are not rationally derivable, that's the damage of postmodernism. It kills the Enlightenment idea that we can make better choices, live better lives, and have better communities through reason, through science, through the tools of science, through the products of science.
Well, isn't there an element there of the information age? The fact that we have vast amounts of data, we don't know what to do with them, and the idea of the expert has been essentially broken down, because anyone with a platform is now a pseudo-expert, and you don't know who to believe.
Yeah, I don't think that's as much of a problem as other people. Evidently, it is a problem because people can't seem to navigate some pretty simple.
Well, I'll give you an example here. So you mentioned hot button issues. I'll take global warming as one.
Okay.
You've got folks who go out and say 99% of scientists believe this. Then you'll have a contradictory study. Well, then you find out some of them are skewed, some of them are not skewed. Some of the scientists are getting paid. So literally, even if you want to do the right thing, you don't know what to believe because there's so much misinformation out there. So now It's no longer black and white.
All right, now we're having a conversation about something extraordinarily significant. So I just listened to Sam Harris's podcast of Gary Taubes, the anti-sugar guy for oversimplification.
Right.
But it was an absolutely fascinating podcast on a number of levels. So what the postmodernists have been saying, there is definitely some truth to that. And that is, I think Sam Harris started that podcast and he said, we're about to send someone to Mars and we can't come to some kind of a consensus about what they should eat for breakfast. And there's something very profound about that. So the postmodernists are correct, and I think diet's a good example of that. Climate science in the 90s was a good example of that, and that's if you want a more academic spin on that, that's Thomas Kuhn's work, is that people have used what they thought was good science and what they thought was good evidence and what they thought was good research, and they've reached erroneous conclusions. And that's absolutely correct. And we need to be mindful. That's why you said 99% of scientists. I think that comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Mm-hmm. And even that figure has been under attack because it used to be 95%, because anybody can belong to the Union of Concerned Scientists. You just write a check. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but check me on that, fact check that. So the idea being, if it really is the case that science has been wrong about certain things in the past, yeah, it is. But the solution to that is better science. It's not to say these people have taken that core idea and they've run crazy with it. They've gone berserk. And the conclusion that they want you to drive is that there's no objective truth. It's not knowable. You can't figure out how to navigate these. Everybody has their own subjectivity. And that's just ridiculous.
But that's
clearly false.
I would say, that's tenuous. So you say you need better science. I agree with you completely. But I think in the 21st century, it's whoever has a platform. And I take this to a very weird area, which is modern art. All right, you could put a banana in a glass case, or it was a pineapple. That was
a pineapple. Yeah.
You could put a pineapple in a glass case. Now that was an accident, and now you made it into a museum. But really, what is modern art? You know someone who knows someone who puts your dirty sock into a... I know I'm really shitting on modern art here, but that's really the reality. So you know someone who knows someone. The same with science is you could have the best science, but you get no visibility, no publication, or someone skews it.
Hold on a second. We have to unpack that. It is not the same as science because modern art... Excuse me. It is not the same as science because modern art or any kind of art is a preference.
Of course.
So some people like modern art, other people don't like. But there is a fact of the matter about whether or not warming is anthropogenic.
But now facts are a preference because you can find the facts that confirm your inherent bias.
Facts. So that is living in a post-truth world. Facts are preferences for people who either are intellectually lazy or they're overwhelmed and they can't look for evidence and they don't want to say, I don't know, or they like the comfort of certainty. Mm-hmm. But there is a fact of the matter about the relationship between saturated fat and heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we get to the fact of the matter by research, application of the scientific method. We can figure these things out. Now that doesn't mean it's not complicated. It's incredibly complicated. But the difference between, and I'm going to get to your platform comment in a second, mm-hmm. between modern art is that actually is a preference. What I like in terms of my artistic style is absolutely a preference. Now, the postmodern philosopher Lyotard says you can objectify that preference by subjecting it to market forces and figuring out how much people want to spend on it, right? So you can kind of quantify that to a large degree. You're absolutely correct about platform, and I think a great example of that is Alex Jones.
Oh. Yeah.
Right? So
InfoWars, Alex Jones.
Yeah, so just because somebody has a platform, you can't make any inferences about that other than the fact that they have a platform.
Yeah.
And that's been a breaking down of, in fact, I'm just writing a paper about that. That's been a breaking down of traditional sources of information and knowledge that contributes to the idea that either everybody has their own truth or there are alternative facts.
Yeah, that alternative facts. And I think that what we're discussing is the search for the truth. But our search for the truth does mean that something, if we could find it, is objectively true. And I think maybe the postmodern view is, I've heard this, that science needs to be decolonialized. That your data might be wrong because it's done through a white lens. That somehow race is, determinative. This is crap.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is asinine.
Yes.
Well, I mean, and if you can talk about your experiences at Portland, Portland State, I should say, that would be informative.
Okay, so let's take a look at this now. How this gets showing that this is asinine is easy. Explaining how the showing of it is asinine is complicated. So let me ask you a question. Somebody has this crazy idea that there's feminist geography or feminist math, or, female math or female or, Canadian physics or whatever. Okay, so what do you think the best way is to show that idea is false?
Show them a globe? I mean, take them to a
country,
show them a coastline?
Okay, look, this is
attempt to falsify. Right.
I'm telling you right now, this is an incredibly difficult question. So let's say you have a person, like many young college students today, who are indoctrinated by their women's studies professors or gender studies or what have you, mm-hmm. to believe that there's something like along the lines of feminist math.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do you disprove that idea?
Don't you solve a theorem, show them the math, and ask them the question of, show me where that bias is?
It actually is hard.
And I will tell you right now what I would do if I believed in something ridiculous like feminist math. Here we get into a little bit of a problem because I'm defending a position which I think is totally
I would have to
Totally
completely
ridiculous.
understand it. I would be forced to read it and completely understand it before I could unpack it.
And that would bring you to the truth?
Yes. And now I'm forced to read all this stuff.
Yeah, but they can always come back to you and say, well, objectivity is just a male construction.
So they're going to just dare it at me all day long.
I mean, you can't, it's kind of like having a discussion about faith. Someone can always, or belief, someone can say, well, that's what I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, but just because you believe it doesn't make it true. Mm-hmm. I mean, people believe all kinds of crazy stuff. And in my book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, I lay out in the back of the book a roadmap for literally talking people out of relativism. It guides people step by step into questions they can ask in these decision trees. Mm-hmm. Here's what I would say is the best way to call bullshit on the whole enterprise. Are you familiar with what's called a Sokol hoax?
No.
Okay, so it is definitely worth putting in the comments on your podcast. So this guy, Alan Sokol, was a physicist from NYU. I think he was like a distinguished professor of physics, really serious, an actual physicist. And he wrote a hoax paper in what was the then top journal in the world, in top postmodern journal in the world. And he called it something like Toward a Hermeneutic of Gravity or something. Total bullshit. Like he just strung together random words for 20 pages or something and made it, the whole thing was gibberish. And they published it.
Nice.
So if the people who are propagating these ideas cannot distinguish total bullshit from what their ideas actually are, every rational person could see that what they're trying to espouse is nonsense.
I got it. So he's written a complete crap that he didn't research it. He just wrote it up, got it published.
Yeah,
so it does cast doubt on the editor's ability to understand this material too.
Yeah, when you do a cut of this podcast, you know what you should do? You should just pick random parts out of that thing and just read it.
You know, and I want to do, so I want to read one thing from it, and now it's not from there, it's from an assessment of it, but it says, there are those postmoderns in the humanities who like to surf through avant-garde grade fields like quantum mechanics or chaos theory to dress up their own arguments about the fragmentary and random nature of experience. And those are your sociologists, your historians, philosophers who just put their own spin on objective information.
It's even worse than putting their own spin on it. They're denying it entirely. Now, not everybody, of course. So that's why these fields are in crisis. That's why the discipline of academic philosophy, for example, has largely lost its relevance. And I just published a paper about this with James Lindsay. It's based on Dan Dennett's idea of chmess, playing. It's like chess with an M, CHMESS. People are pursuing. They're not pursuing ideas of abiding significance. People in their disciplines can't even talk to other people. I go to these conferences. I have no idea what anybody's talking about. Like, no clue what anybody's talking about. And it's not just because it's totally esoteric. It's because it's almost meaningless. And it's not because it's overly filled with jargon, but it is. But we're almost valuing, well, not almost, we're valuing teaching people that obfuscation is a virtue. Mm-hmm. And I talked about this in my authenticity talk at TAM a few years ago. Yeah. Speaking clearly is a virtue. That's what's virtuous, not using words that nobody can understand and bullshitting other people.
So because
and
it's
certainly
so...
not. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say because it's so effective. What's your take on the way forward? How do we move forward from here? We're now in 2017, and this is the reality of every field, that you obfuscate and you succeed because people ascribe to you some sort of expertise.
You cut out in the last 20 seconds of the question.
Yeah, how do you...
I just caught...
How do you answer your own question then? How do you debunk feminist geography or something?
Well, you have to... The first thing you do... Look. The first thing we need to do, and we're just so far from this, is we need to be honest with ourselves. You would have thought with the election of Trump, the left would have wised up and knocked off the identity politics and say, oh, geez, we got a serious problem here. Mm-hmm. But instead, what do? They protest with Linda Sarsour, don't get me started. And then I made a comment at we did the film Reasons to Believe about belief, and I made a comment that I got an unbelievable amount of grief over, and the comment was stop protesting in pussy hats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I almost said, and I'm going to say it now, but I almost said, would Martin Luther King have worn a pussy hat?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, you know what? It just is not worth the grief that I would deal with from saying it. And so, especially since I'm not tenured, I don't need any more grief. I got enough enemies. I got enough shit to worry about. I don't need yet another batch of people enraged at me. So we've created these cultures where everybody's jockeying and they're looking to be offended. They're looking to be outraged. They're looking to call the diversity board. They're looking to fuck with you at every turn. Mm-hmm. Or at least if you teach in a public institution, they are. I can't really speak to the fact of things outside of my own experience. So we have major cultural problems and ways that we communicate with each other that seem I don't think these things are intractable. I think that there are ways to deal with them, and I think that we need to have certain values about civility and discourse, about what it means to be offended, about about are our values rationally derivable. You know, we should be having a whole bunch of conversations about North Korea, about factory farming, but we're not having those conversations. Mm-hmm. And then every time you don't have those conversations, some extremist is going to step in with the solution.
Well, that's a brilliant point. That if the moderates self-censor, and that's a problem. Some of the censorship is happening from the grief, but most of it is I'm going to not say it because I don't want the trouble. And when we evacuate that space, the extremists run in to capture it.
Yeah, and so really, so let's say that I say something. Now I'm sorry, I'm going to get an unbelievable amount of grief about the pussy hats comment, but it's true. It's like we have created conditions that are inimical to human flourishing.
Yeah.
We have almost placed a stranglehold on the ability of reason, rationality, and science to flourish. And so why is it that we have to go to these podcasts to have really interesting conversations? Well, we have to go to them because we can't really have them in the universities. Michael Shermer put a nice tweet about that. He had a contentious debate, and it wasn't on a college campus. It was in a public library. So we're teaching people, look, think about it this way. What do you think the consequence is of being taught by people who pretty much all have the same ideology? What do you think
indoctrination.
Yeah.
And what do you think is going to happen to that person when they encounter an argument that runs counter to the ideology that in which they've been indoctrinated?
Retract.
Or rail back.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't know how to deal with it. They won't know how to use the tool, their verbal, they won't know they'll crumble. And that's exactly what you're seeing now. You're seeing the consequences of people who profess to be for diversity, but don't let them fool you. They are anti-diversity.
Well, Peter, I would make the argument that there's a perfect storm of the power of provocation colliding with the information age of the 21st century. I don't think anyone's going to argue that you have, in a general society, less intellectuals than more intellectuals. So what happens if you put on a provocative hat, you are a non-intellectual, and you want the attention of being on the news? You have a bunch of people who now have a platform to be able to do that. You put an interesting sign up there, you wear a stupid hat, boom, you're on the news, done. Your life goal complete. So that's why we keep seeing this, and that's why it's so powerful. I don't know that we'll ever be able to escape that now that we have cameras in every pocket.
Oh, we will certainly be able to escape it because there will be some people at some point. We can rely upon certain people for news. Look, the problem is that people go and they seek out news, and I find myself guilty of this as well. They seek out sources of news and information that they already agree with, right? Whereas you should be doing exactly the opposite.
Yes.
And that deepens and entrenches people in their beliefs, and that also gives them the sense of blasphemy and heresy and different mechanisms, probably evolutionary mechanisms, that we've developed to keep our ideas in place and keep our beliefs in place. I think these these things we can overcome these. I don't see these as intractable problems. I do think we are facing some intractable problems. I don't think that's among them.
Well, that confirmation bias isn't going away. And, for a second, I'll come back to that whole climate change thing. So I was just given an article to read that basically said the Danish Meteorological Institute just released a report saying that Arctic ice growth has been growing in 2017.
I saw that too.
So what did I immediately do? I read it. I said, okay, let me go online and let me see what the rebuttal is. I couldn't find a rebuttal. I was shocked I couldn't find one. So I'm left with saying, okay, it must be true. No one's rebutting it. People are sweeping it under the rug. Maybe the climate science is wrong, or people just haven't had a chance to react to it. And then if they do react to it, is that going to be a biased response? So now I'm left with this gray area of what do I believe? And there are a lot of people that are in this bog.
Yeah, I would say first, good for you for doing due diligence for that. And it is certainly true that no one had time to respond to it yet. But even if someone responded to it, unless you have that background, that's particularly difficult to make those kind of assessments, right? You would need a really specialized educational tool set to bring to bear on those problems that, with all due respect, I don't know you. I've never spoken to you.
No.
I would highly doubt that you. I know. Put it on myself. I don't have those tools.
I'll just make the call. He
guess,
doesn't.
Nope.
Oh, sorry about that.
I'm just your garden variety skeptic.
But maybe go.
No, but that's good in the sense that what you did was engage in a process to try to find the truth, right? But look, part of the problem is that we only have so much time in the day. There are only so many pieces of information that we can hunt down.
Yeah, but how
At some
representative
point,
am
we
I?
have to defer to people who are experts in the subject area.
Mm-hmm. No, so Peter, how representative am I, or Brian, for that matter, of the general population? If we comprise, I don't know, 5%, even higher, and I'm not trying to ascribe some sort of,
Yeah, we're gonna.
Greatness to us as skeptics, but what is the rest of the population doing? You click on Facebook, you see an article, you read it. I mean, that's as much in-depth research as most folks are doing.
Okay, so it has been my contention from day one that this is not going to be a popular idea, but that's not a problem. It's not a problem because it's a consequence of a belief set, of a set of values that is a problem. So if you want to address what you consider to be a problem, then the way to do it is to address what I consider to be the root problem. And the root problem is a combination of things. One, it's people are uncomfortable not knowing. They're uncomfortable saying, I don't know. They're very comfortable pretending to know things they don't know, or letting their moral mind dominate their rational mind because they think they should believe something. They need to be the type of person who believes these things. Yeah. So I think that the way to do that is to help people value certain things. I really, the more research I do, the more I look into this, the more I think about this. I am now almost completely convinced that this whole enterprise is about values.
Mm-hmm.
How do we teach people to value the right things? Now, what are the right things? Well, the part of the right things is trying to figure out, here's an example of the right thing. If I change my mind, that makes me a good person. If I say I don't know when I don't know, that makes me a good person. You want one value that's going to lift this whole boat? That's the value.
Which is honesty.
But self-honesty and not letting other people shame you when you admit that you don't know something, when they themselves are probably pretending to know something they don't know.
But you can't escape confirmation bias. So what happens if you have that guy that was releasing, he lived out in California, he was releasing the fake news about Hillary Clinton before the election.
Right.
And then there was the whole claim that, he was somehow responsible for Trump being elected. So this is a hack. Right now we have Facebook and all of these other platforms trying to self-police, trying to get rid of fake media.
Okay, that's okay.
So the last thing I want to say on that is you're going to have an evolution of that hack out in California is going to get better. And now he's going to slightly be able to skew data so he gets past those filters. And now you're throwing a piece of meat into a tank of piranhas because confirmation bias for folks that crave that information, the fact that Obama got arrested in Thailand for snorting cocaine or whatever fake story you want, they want that story. As soon as they see it, they pounce on it.
So you are absolutely correct that the inevitable consequence of cracking down on fake news is that there'll be a type of arms race with fake news in the same way that there's been an arms race with email spam or what have you. I think the solution that I've offered addresses that from the get-go, and that is you were 100% correct when you said, and if I got your quote wrong, please correct me, but I thought you said you'll never be able to correct confirmation bias.
Right.
Okay, you're correct. You're absolutely correct. That said, what we can do is we can counter that with our own value. And that value is that people should hold beliefs less tenaciously. They should be less confident in their conclusions.
I think you said it right on the Rubin report, and I think I will quote you right, like giving people an opportunity to reflect on what they know. And in order to do that, you actually have to have an unsafe space, not a safe spaces. And I thought this was brilliant. You said safe spaces have taken the engine out of rationality by stopping questions. That's profound. Maybe we should say, instead of check your privilege, check your offense.
Yeah. No, that's right. I'm glad you liked the Rubin report show. I think that's correct. We need unsafe spaces. And I don't mean unsafe spaces where people's immutable characteristics are attacked. The color of someone's eyes, their height, their skin color. I mean where their ideas are viciously subject to analysis, refutation, criticism, and not even their ideas, but all ideas.
Right.
And there is considerable, and when we need spaces to do that. And in my judgment, the university should be where that starts. But the universities now in particular, look, think about this. We now have a crop of students going in. I'm on sabbatical. When I come back, these people would have only known safe spaces. Think about that for a second. Think about their reaction when they sit in my look, I teach critical thinking, I teach ethics, I teach atheism, I teach science and pseudoscience. Think about that when I'm dropping bombs out there about ideas that people think are true that are not true. Think about their reaction to that, having never having the experience of what you do to engage an idea that you don't like. How do you consider it? What does it mean to be honest with yourself? Should I revise my beliefs?
Can you give us an example of a myth that you bust? For lack of a better word?
Or a statement that, or a reaction to like a Socratic idea that's been met with craziness.
Yeah, there are so many ideas I don't even know where to begin. Entire syllabus class falls into that category.
Oh, so, Peter, you might have to repeat that. You broke up during.
I think we use the Skeptics Dictionary and we pull topics from the Skeptics Dictionary, or I can send you the syllabus if you'd like. You can post it on your website as well. The problem is whether different people's conceptions are bust open, if you will, by different things people say. Some people are bust open by homeopathy. So about 5 years ago, I asked this question, and I was just flabbergasted at the response. I said, how many people have ever had a coffee enema? And half the people in my class really, half the people in my class of 120 raised their hand. Now, in this day and age, I'm 50. When I grew up, everything was personal. Like, you just didn't talk about stuff. Like, you didn't admit stuff. You didn't. But today, everybody's open with everything.
Right.
Talking about their periods, whatever they're talking about. You wouldn't believe the stuff people come to me in my office and talk to me about. I can't even believe it. The problem is that different things will set different people off. But the way to deal with that is to expose them and to teach them how to differentiate between personal attacks and subjecting an idea to scrutiny.
Separate the message from the messenger, I think you have said before.
And there are ways to do that to make it more palatable. But the problem is, again, you now have students who have gone through the whole educational process and they've never had some pretty fundamental ideas challenged. Now, if you're in an accounting class, there's no reason that you should have those ideas challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But in the subjects in which are ethics, morals, moral reasoning, atheism, beliefs about God, beliefs about the existence of everything.
It's a great point. I mean, and it seems like the humanities, right, are affected the most. That STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and medicine, are largely unaffected by this kind of crazy, convoluted, what I think is religious fundamentalist talk. But is that true?
I'm so happy you said that. I'm so happy you said that because it is a type of religion. And I co-published a piece called Privilege, the Left's Original Sin. And the right has the same thing that the left has. So we're looking at a new religion that's emerging, new forms of censorship. And I tweeted a bunch of stuff about this on my Twitter feed. New ways that just the content of those beliefs differ. But the mechanisms to suppress ideas and not have their own ideas challenged is identical to religion.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. You shout it down. I mean, I could imagine this, roll it back to 1930s Catholicism, and you're out there advocating a gay pride parade. Yeah. I mean, the world's going to crash down on you.
Right. And that's the interesting thing. Why would you think about this? Why would you have to shut it down if you thought your values were rationally derivable? Right. So do you see how this whole thing is it's a recipe to keep people's beliefs intact? If you actually believed that what you believe was true, then you'd be like the Christian apologists with 1 Peter 3:15. You'd have a defense of your faith ready to go.
Yeah.
But I don't think that these people are so steeped in subjectivity and postmodernity. I don't think that these people, they have really turned away from any notion of the truth. So if you've turned away from the notion of truth and everything is subjective, well, then your values aren't rationally derivable. And if your values aren't rationally derivable, then we need to start punching people in the head who don't think like we do, or shoot them or bring in tanks or whatever it is.
That regressivism, I mean, it's a fine line because when we approach the Enlightenment, and you brought up a good point, if you were promoting gay rights and the Catholic Church was bringing you down because they have the ultimate right, they know that they're right, they have the one truth. So now we've gone into an age of subjectivity and postmodernism.
Exactly.
But now you can sit there and you can say, that doesn't look orange to me, that's purple, and you'll have a professor go, you know what, you're entitled to your belief. Whatever it looks like to you, it is what it is, without relying on the fact that there is any objectivity. So we've swung the pendulum totally in the opposite direction. And it's interesting how it's ever going to swing back to the middle.
Yeah, okay, and you need one more, you're correct, and you need one more thing to your analysis. These people think that they're better people for having the beliefs they hold. That moral dimension is indispensable to understanding the whole framework.
Right. It's like a person saying, my faith makes me a better person.
Exactly.
But my social justice activism makes me a better person.
That's right. That is exactly correct. Now we can understand this movement in terms of the moral motivations of the actors. You know, sometimes someone will tweet at me, why should we discuss it? What conversation should we be had with a racist? Or what can we can't, there's nothing to discuss. Or, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you mean to tell, so again, that means, to me, that tells me your values aren't rationally derivable.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I don't know.
It's a great point, but we must have that conversation. For the person that says, I don't want a racist to have a platform. Well, I agree. We don't want to put on a white supremacist on 60 Minutes, like they kind of did. But that's not the right platform. But in order to get rid of racism, if you want to do that, engage the racist, maybe on a one-on-one, a platform of one. We must do this.
Well, we just mentioned the fact that there is a perceived superiority in one's opinions who has who has different opinions than you. But I think you can separate that from what you just mentioned, which is if you have a certain thought, say you're a racist or whatever it is, you may be potentially wrong in the eyes of another person, but that person could think that they have a moral high ground. And I'll ground this in an example because I've had this conversation for the past month, and I can't tell if I'm right or wrong. I make the claim that liberals on the topic of healthcare could claim that they have a moral high ground because in a kind of a topic of selflessness, they say everyone should have healthcare. I think it's a basic human right. You're born as a human. You should have it. And I will argue with conservatives who say, when you say that you have the moral high ground, you're being an elitist ass. And by virtue of you even thinking that, you've now killed the conversation. Yeah. So I don't know where to go with that because I truly believe it. I don't think I'm elitist, but apparently that's what I sound like.
You should read the book In Defense of Elitism. It's a great book.
Well, and this is a great segue to the app. I mean, and so there's an Atheos app, Atheos, that you can download, and I did. It's free. You can upgrade it for I think $3.99 or $4.99, which I did. And it goes through some of the ideas, and it's really funny in a lot of ways because it'll take a question posed by a religious person. It's really easy to turn this into a postmodernist person too, but and how do you engage with them? And a lot of times it's dissecting down to what they believe. So if you're going to talk to a racist, well, I believe the white race is superior. Well, why do you believe that? Is the first question. Try to make them explain their position before you try to refute it. And so I think this applies to postmodernism, and I'm hoping that part of the app comes out too.
Yeah. So do you want you want to bump this whole conversation up a conceptual level?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Bam, hit us.
So think about this. So when you're speaking with someone of faith, when you really have them, invariably, if they're going to claim that their beliefs are true, at some point in that conversation, they're going to have to go back to the idea of faith. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately that's the justification that they're going to use. Now, they may think that they have evidence,
right?
But ultimately they'll think, look, I have enough evidence. It's insufficient to justify my confidence, and faith takes me the rest of the way.
Reasonable faith. Yeah, people say that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are we clear on that? Because this is going to get extremely complicated in a minute. We cool?
Yep. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Now let's think of ourselves talking to a regressive. When you talk to a regressive, they don't have faith. The reason that they don't have faith is because they think that they have evidence. Now let's unpack that because this is truly complicated. They think through all their studies of Judith Butler and through all their feminism classes and for all the spirit of the times at the university, and they've read all these articles, that they have evidence for their beliefs, therefore of white privilege, and there is evidence of white privilege, but that they have evidence for their beliefs so much so that it constitutes a worldview for them. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what is the difference between these people and, for example, evangelical fundamentalists? Well, the reason that they don't need faith is because the journals that people are publishing in, they're either publishing in these rinky-dink journals. Okay, so we're going to take a step back. One of the ways that you get promoted in tenure, et cetera, is that you publish in journals, in peer-reviewed journal articles. Yep. Those peer-reviewed journal articles then build off of other peer-reviewed journal articles, and they make a canon of knowledge. But the problem is a lot of these canons of knowledge are completely untethered to reality. They're total bullshit. They're floating in make-believe land because the initial premises are false. Mm-hmm. So when you talk to a regressive, they're not going to tell you I have faith in this once you press them and start talking about it. The smart regressives are going to start citing studies that have then been cited by other people or works, or they're not even studies because they're not empirically based. They're not research. They're just ideological. They're primarily driven by people's moral motivations and ideologies. So they don't use faith because they think they have evidence. Therefore, it's much more difficult to talk to these people than it is to talk to evangelical Christians.
Exactly.
So you're still working on this app, is what you're saying. But keep going.
Well, I'm writing about that in my next book, basically how to make impossible conversations possible. And I did the 2017 Reason Fest a couple of months ago, and I just laid out maybe 50 of the techniques in the book, everywhere from the fundamentals, basics, intermediate, advanced, expert, and master level of how to talk to a zealot, a fundamentalist of any stripe. Mm-hmm. And it's not particularly – I mean, at the higher levels of conversation, you need a skill set that the book sets out. But these things are out there. I mean, we know how to do this from hostage negotiation techniques. We know how to do this from cult exiting. We know how to do this from the prison literature, from from applied epistemology. I mean, we know how to do this stuff. The thing is just synthesizing it and using it. And that's one of the things I try to do in the app, is to give people a tool that they could just use in their hand and whip out so that they can have those sorts of conversations and be more productive and effective in those conversations.
I'd be fascinated to sharpen my skills of critical thinking and really poignant questioning, because I get faced with the fact that someone will throw out an example or an obscure journal like you mentioned, and I haven't read it, and I can make an assumption based on the source, what the information is and how it's biased, but I don't really have a way of saying, you know what you essentially just alluded to is bullshit, so you can't cite it in this argument, so let's get back to square one. That doesn't work, even if you do it nicely.
The problem with that is, in the same way that you can't say to the Christian that when he just cited some guy who's truly in a massive echo chamber, who cited another Christian about the resurrection, who cited somebody else about it. The problem is you're dealing with complicated psychological and morally motivated issues and people and items, and it's just at some point it just flares up into this incredible mass of complexity. So how do we break those things down to make them more intelligible? Like, how do we try to get a handle on that? Because again, if you don't want to have those conversations, then the alternative is some kind of a war zone, or power, or might makes right, or some kind of a struggle, a physical struggle.
I guess that basically makes sense, because in your Christian argument, I would go back, before these modern scholars or whoever you read who tell you something about Jesus. You can go back to the literature work, to the Bible, and you can find faults with it. So you can go back to the source. With a more nuanced argument or a more modern argument, again, going back to global warming, there is no genesis. So what I find myself doing is going, well, think of the worst case scenario. Which side do you want to be on? That's the only basis that you have. If you don't have time to read 5 million journals and be an expert in pH of the oceans, think of the worst possible scenario. And
that's called the precautionary principle.
Oh.
And the idea is that you want to act in such a way that it's true, even if it's not. You want to hedge your bets in a way.
Oh, thank you for giving credence to that technique. I love it.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a principle in I mean, this whole thing, we are faced with some extremely serious problems right now. And there are better and worse ways to deal with these problems. And the left, first of all, the right is behaving, I mean, the Trump administration is, I think David Fromm tweeted out, the worst president we've ever had, and that includes all the slaveholders. I mean, this guy and his appointments, he's a horror show. And the left is not, by and large, this doesn't mean everybody on the left, but they're really not forming a thoughtful, coherent, unified points of disagreement. And certainly the Democrats aren't in that category. Mm-hmm. And I am extremely concerned about our environmental future. I'm extremely concerned about, that's just parenthetically, that's my speculation for why the markets have gone up under Trump. I think at some level, when you have more lax environmental regulations, you're going to see an immediate payoff in the markets. That's my unlettered opinion. You can take it for what it's worth. But we are facing some extraordinarily serious issues, and I do not think we have dealt with these honestly, openly. I continue to create cultures where sincere and asking questions brings them down nothing but heaps of trouble on their head and thefts of their time and problems. We just have to change the value to open conversation, honest dialogue, and respecting sincere inquirers when they say, look, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a climate scientist. I don't study the relationship between saturated fat and hard I don't know. There seems to be conflicting data out there. And letting it be okay for people to say, I don't know.
I think the key word that you mentioned is sincere. You made a great point on who should we argue with. Because if there's an insincere person that you're certain is pushing an ideology and that would not sit down for a beer with you after watching a Heineken commercial, for example, you probably don't want to engage with that person. But if you believe that person is, then it's probably worth the conversation.
Yeah, I'll name a name. I think Denisha DSouza is insincere.
Okay. That's
okay.
A fair.
So you really mean to tell me that you didn't know that having a woman, sleeping with a woman. Now, look, let me say, I don't give a shit who you sleep with, how many times you sleep with them. I couldn't possibly care less. 10 people, 100 people, animals. It's none of my business. I don't care. No, I really, truly don't care. But he alleged to care, right? He alleged to care, and he cared about other people doing it. And you mean to tell me, in your position as a Christian scholar and Christian ethicist, that you didn't know that having sex with a woman while you were married was adultery?
Right. Yeah.
That's insincere. That's slimy. Right. That's being an unctuous toad. That's being dishonest.
I'm going to use
either that or you really do have some kind of brain damage.
Right.
And so
you pick someone on the right, and I think like Glenn Greenwald and Nathan Lane's attacks on Sam Harris are also insincere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Glenn Greenwald is an odious human being. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a pathological liar. So look, the right has their share of dishonest, insincere, crazy people. The left has their share of dishonest, insincere, crazy people. And maybe you're right. Maybe we've given platforms and microphones to people, the worst elements in society. The elements in society that promote disunity and discord and intentionally lie. And I think that the type of lies I don't think that they're necessarily worse if you bracket environmental lies, but the type of lies that Denisha DSouza did, you could kind of understand it was personally motivated. Glenn Greenwald, on the other hand, he is really a piece of work.
I don't know what
really
motivates him.
Yeah, and the grotesque mischaracterization of Harris's work, if you really disagreed with the work, then why not substantively engage on its merits?
Because it's a straw man, double straw man. It's...
Yeah, because you don't believe, people who tweeted me, you're against protesting. When have I ever said I'm against where does that, why do you have to manufacture something that someone believes and then attack it?
Yeah.
Well, you only do that because... Look, I'm not going to second guess someone's psychology, but my guess would be the reason that people do that is because they don't know how to formulate a substantive attack of what they do say, and they want to be the type of people who are morally motivated to do the right sorts of things. But it's not because they came to their conclusion from a thoughtful and sincere examination of the evidence. Quite the contrary, or they wouldn't hold the beliefs they hold.
It's Machiavellian.
Now, Ken Ham is a great example of someone who does not fit in that category. He is completely sincere.
Yeah.
And I respect him for that sincerity. I don't respect the conclusions that he holds, but he is sincere. He actually believes what he says he believes.
Well, I still see no organic way of moving forward with this. You've got these, they're different, but they have their own gravitational forces, all of these personages. And you don't even have to be that big. You could have a YouTube following of 10,000 followers, and that could grow to whatever. It doesn't matter what kind of idea you have. And that's the challenge. Is I was thinking, what's the solution? You need some sort of altruist, some sort of purist who's going to have a media empire. You need an Elon Musk that is like a Rupert Murdoch.
No.
So I thought maybe that was the solution, but it's not, because you're going to always have these.
It's not, because no top-down solution will work.
Yeah. Grassroots.
It has to be a grassroots, like Atheos, a manual for creating atheists, whatever it is, making impossible conversations possible, whatever the titles. It has to be giving individuals the tools to enable them on one-on-one conversational basis to have conversations with someone, change their beliefs if their beliefs are in error, dealing civilly and rationally with people. So the way to do it isn't from the top down, from mandating or mediating or creating these platforms that allow, certainly the creation of more equitable platforms. And Tim Van Gelder tried to do something like this, or is doing it. I don't know if he's still doing it. It's a brilliant idea of giving people voices in the community, and their critics vote them on how good they are.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Jimmy Wales has this Wiki Tribune project that's premiering.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's a game changer. And that is kind of grassroots, because you've got a self-moderated community.
Yeah.
But grassroots works. I often talk about this, like recycling, right? Dimitri's can doesn't count. My can doesn't count. Peter, your can doesn't count. But our collective cans do. And recycling helps, right? I mean, the amount of aluminum that we recycle is massive. But my one can makes no real difference. So individual people listening that are distressed, and sometimes I do get distressed about this, just those conversations you have one-on-one add up. They do help.
Yeah,
people listening, please recycle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if this is going to speak to that point or not, but I just told my son this morning in the car, I like heavy metal, and we were listening to something that was pretty heavy in the car. And I told him that when I was in college, I used to listen to really heavy music, like much heavier than I was listening to now. That's because he was in the car. And I said, my buddy Eric said to me at the time, wow, like what could our kids, if we ever have kids, what could they listen to that's more extreme than this? I mean, it was really the most extreme death metal. And I thought to myself, like, nothing. There's nothing they could listen to. But what happened was there was nothing more extreme in the genre or the category, but the categories changed. In other words, then you went to rap music talking about the N-word and hoes and bitches and all this stuff. And just in the same way, you can think that this solution, we got to recycle, we got to do this, we got to do this. But that, is it true? Yeah, it's true. It's only true if you hold that category, if you privilege that category somehow. What we really need to be doing is we need to be limiting our population, particularly in the first world, because people in the first world are in the position to use aluminum in the first place, and they have kids who have kids who have kids. But telling people to recycle aluminum, what have you, it's a very simple solution. People like stuff like that. Like, it makes them feel good when they throw their can in the recycle bin. But I don't think that that's the – here's a bomb I'll throw at you right now to think – you said, how can you – what are some of the things you said or I say in class? Here's something to think about. If you truly want to be sustainable, as opposed to just giving lip service to ecological sustainability, then we have to have a very, very serious conversation about cutting the number of humans down on planet Earth. I don't mean cutting them down, like mowing them down. I mean limiting the number of
population control.
Yeah, you have to have that conversation. And if you want to have that conversation, you have to have a conversation about birth control. And yep, you've got to have a conversation about abortion, right? And if you want to have the totality of the conversation, then the fact of the matter is there are going to be some people who, for whatever reason, aren't willing to do that. And then you have to ask, well, what should the reach of the government be? I was
just about to say that swings into the totalitarian.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that was the title of my paper.
Well,
was democracy just a moment, the new ecological totalitarianism? Because that's what we have to do. But people don't want to hear that. They want to hear, let's recycle.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to have to stay up all night to unpack this, right? Now, I'm not going to get any sleep because I'm going to be thinking about what you just said all night.
You'll read about India and trying to do forced sterilizations, and then you'll get into China that had the one-child, now two-child policy, and you've got people railing about that because that's messing with your social liberties. And how do you get to the truth without ruffling feathers? You're going to ruffle feathers.
Okay, and just in the same way that you're thinking about that and they're thinking about the one China policy thing, that's what we need to do in classrooms.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need to transform those learning experiences to people where they're exposed to ideas that may not be palatable to them.
Yeah.
And we have to have these conversations, and they have to take place in an unsafe space.
Mm-hmm. Right. The ideas are not safe from scrutiny. Oh, totally.
That's correct. 100%.
I find it hard to believe, and maybe this is just me being blind to it, but the fact that the academic environment has changed so much since I was in college, or for that matter, high school, because we talked about all of these things. Now, maybe I had great teachers, and maybe it's a case-by-case basis, but it's hard to believe that professors simply ignore these topics because they don't want controversy in the classroom.
Well, look, one of my colleagues said, he without revealing any details about him, he said, "Oh, this is overblown. It's overblown." I said, "Oh yeah, really? Okay. Why don't you teach Peter Singer's?" Peter Singer he's an ethicist, Australian ethicist. He has a piece on what we should do with people who have cognitive disabilities, that is IQs 25 or under. I'm pretty sure that's how he defines it. Mm-hmm. Why don't you teach that in your class? Why don't you see how that goes over for you?
Oh boy, I'm already cringing. So
yeah, so you think this problem's great? Then why don't you do? No, I'm not going to do. Well, no, wait.
Because he's going to get into eugenics.
Why not?
Yeah. So wait a second. Why don't you want to do? Oh, just because. I said that's right. What the just because is. So here's the other thing to think about. So the consequence of that in aggregate is that it pushes everybody to mediocrity. Mm-hmm. All of the faculty members are pushed to mediocrity because they don't want to substantively engage issues in which they could get into trouble. Their time could be stolen. People could be offended. They could file complaints against them. And I don't blame them in a very practical level. Like, they don't want to deal with it. So the problem is this an institutional problem where we push people, the faculty, to mediocrity, and then we have mediocre students as a result.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That I think that's legit. I mean, I could talk to you all night. I've got a whole bunch to unpack after this, but absolutely appreciate the conversation, Peter. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I like the way you make me think.
You've shared an incredible amount of information with us, and we cannot recommend your material enough. Your new app, which Brian,
it's worth it. I paid the $3.99, $4.99. It's worth it. There's a lot in there. There's also links to a lot of videos that make a lot of sense. So it's a really good place to go, especially if you're concerned about this issue and you want to talk about it and want to do some real activism, which is engaging people about their beliefs.
And well, I appreciate it. I get it. Next time I get down about all the crazies, I'm gonna remember your kind words. So thank you.
And I definitely want to mention your book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Go out, buy it. It's a pretty amazing read. And you're working on another one that. Do you have a release date yet?
I don't have a publisher. I'm just writing it now. I will say, without revealing too much, I have a wonderful project that is going to come out that it's a secret, but I think it's going to be a game changer. I'm hesitant to even say that because it's incredibly ambitious. So we'll see how it goes. But my project should be complete within the next month or two, and we'll see how it's going to go.
Well, we would love to have you back on to talk about it, to have you back on before our Myth Information Conference in September, where we would love to promote it if it's as impactful as you say that it's going to be.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you be the judge of that.
Awesome.
Perfect.
So thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Myth Informed. Myth Informed is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasick, associate producers Fritz Blondon and Kristen Whitaker Hood, engineer Josh Benishek, technical consultant Jason Lawson, and hosts Brian, Dimitri, Jacob, and Joseph. Every week we produce a new podcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Mythicist Milwaukee also brings major secular conferences and debates to the Milwaukee area, along with community events, both local and online. To support us in bringing future events, become a member at mythicistmilwaukee.com to receive member-only benefits. You can also visit mythicistmilwaukee.com and hit the donate button located at the bottom of each page to place a financial donation amount of your choice. And now, the closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
There was a time when everyone believed Atheos in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next to die? There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will